Welcome back to Built Fabrications, and today we're going to be moving to the rear axle on the 79 F150 and getting this tore down so that we can replace the center section on it. So let's go ahead and jump on into it.
You can see the riding on the pavement. Young kids, they're growing up in basements.
All right, so the first thing we're going to need to do is get this wheel pulled off. All right, so we got the wheel taken off. This side doesn't have the brake shoes or the springs or anything. The other side does, so I'll show you that later. But whenever you get all that taken off, the next thing you're going to want to do, which is already taken off on this side, is take off your 4 nuts that secure your axle and your axle plate in. To do that, there's an access hole here on the axle, and you'll just rotate it to get to each one of those nuts that you need to. All right, so the next thing you're going to do after you get those 4 nuts taken off is you need to go ahead and pull the axle out. You can get an axle puller, but another trick, if you don't have one, is you could go ahead and take your drum, flip it backwards, put your lug nuts on it, and then you could use that to pry. All right, so moving over here to this other side, it does have the shoes and the hardware, so we need to go ahead and strip all this off so that we can get access to get this axle out. All right, so we have all the brake hardware stripped off. Now we can go ahead and pull off our hardware that I showed you on the side. And whenever this is off, we'll get this axle pulled out. All right, so with both axles pulled out, the next thing you're going to do is take out the center section. To do that, you undo all the nuts that are on these studs on the axle housing. This is already done. So then you just need to oftentimes tap around this axle housing. Try to avoid using a chisel or a screwdriver because you don't want to mar up your mating surface, and get this bad boy pulled out. There we go. Now that you have your axle fully disassembled, to get the new center section on order, you need to know a few things. First of which is going to be what spline your axle is. The Ford 9-inch came in a 27 spline and a 31 spline. Really the only way to know for sure is to take it apart and count. The spline is going to be these ridges here on the end of the axle shaft, so you're going to want to count those. Most trucks are probably going to be a 31, but I can't guarantee that. Don't rely on that information. So pull the axle, count it. This is a 31, and the next thing we're going to need to do is know what your yoke is what U-joint your yoke is going to take. All right, so in order to find out what U-joint you have, if you have the drive shaft and you know what U-joint's, perfect. Go ahead and order the same one if you have it. Unless you're wanting to upgrade, then obviously do whatever upgrade you want to do. If you don't know what it is, what you could do is go to your pinion on your center section, but in this case we can't because it's gone. If you guys are just tuning in for the first time or haven't been following this truck, the yoke on this center section it fell out before we got the truck. I don't know what the situation was. So obviously we can't count it, and the end of the drive shaft that went here also went with wherever the yoke went, so we don't have that. So another thing you could do is go to the transfer case, and even if you're not sure if you do have the U-joint, you don't know what size it is, you can measure it. So you're gonna have, I gotta go to my cheat sheet. You're gonna have 3 different main options. It's gonna be a 1310, a 1330, or a 1350. And what you wanna do is measure the cap, which is going to be right here, where that U-joint goes, and then you wanna measure the width, and that will tell you what size you have. So a 1310 would be a 1 16th inch. Same thing with a 1330 for your cap size. And then the difference being the width, a 1310 would be 3 7/32 wide. And then 1330 would be 3 5/8. And then if you go to an upgraded 1350, that would be 1 3/16 for your cap diameter and 3 5/8. Again, same size, same width as a 1330. So what we're gonna do is take a caliper, zero it out, and to go ahead and get our inside, we're gonna measure the diameter there. What we have is, all right, so what we have is 1.06, and converted 1 16th is 1.0625. So we have an inch, 1 1/16. So we know this is either gonna be a 1310 or a 1330. So now we need to measure the width of it. Measure that, and we have 3.64, which that is going to be a 3 5/8, which we know between the cap and the width is going to be a 1330 U-joint. So now that we know that we have a 31 spline and a 1330 U-joint, we're gonna go ahead and get that new center section ordered. We're gonna be going to 350 rear end gear ratio on this truck, same for the front. And whenever that comes in, we'll get that installed. We'll get this axle cleaned up in the meantime, and then we'll show you how to measure for a drive shaft. All right, so we got our new axle seals installed, both sides. Got the axle painted, looking a lot better now. Whenever I go ahead and do the lift and change the springs to those guys, I'll come through and touch up wherever I missed with any paint, and then all this will be looking nice, you know, new shocks and springs and shackles, all the good stuff. So anyways, got that installed, seals are installed, and we got our new rear end. I'm gonna go ahead and unpackage this and show you guys what we got. We got our brand new third member. This thing has been fully rebuilt. It's a used case and everything, but yoke's brand new. We went and upgraded to a posi. So we went from an open to a posi, so that's really nice, good upgrade to do. And it's got all new clutch packs and new ring and pinion. Everything's dialed, so it's basically a brand new unit. It's literally just reusing the same or an existing case. That's our old one. As you remember, pinion went bye-bye on that, but we ended up getting a whole new setup. So gonna go ahead and we're gonna get this dropped in, and then the next step would be to do the axle bearings, and then we're pretty much just reassembling this thing. All right, got that center section, third member, whatever you want to call it, dropped in, and it is looking good with the gold hardware, grade 8. I found out that the old hardware store, delete that, had a couple nuts that were the wrong pitch in the box, so that's always nice. So I have to come back later and just put 2 nuts on. I was short 2. So, but besides that, this is all in, so now we just got to do the axle bearings, drop those in, and we're pretty much done with rebuilding this axle. The most common way to get these bearings off is to cut them. What you do is just cut through the outer collar, and then all the roller bearings will fall out, and then you cut through the inner sleeve, and then you also have this retaining collar that goes on that holds this bearing on there. It's pressed on. So we'll cut these off, and then I've got some new bearings, and then you'll need to have a hydraulic press to press on the new set, new bearing and collar. So gonna go ahead and get this cut. All right, so we moved on over to the press. Make sure you got your plate on the right way. You want to have the inside part, well, facing inside, and then bearing, and then your retainer. Well, that's the wrong bearing. Guess I didn't need to measure anything. Holy shit. So after the mystery of the great bearing explosion, I did a little bit of investigation and I found out some interesting things. So I want to show you guys what I came up with. Here on the left is the axle that I pulled out of the driver's side, which is the one that the bearing exploded in my face on. And whenever I went and I measured out the axle shaft, I'm getting about 1.62 inches. Hopefully you can see that on camera. And then whenever I came over here to The passenger side, I found that this one, about 1.5, I think it's 1.56 is what it is. 1.55, 1.56. And the bearings that I was pressing on, the inner diameter of that bearing is 1.53 inches, which is the majority for some of like the newer big bearing axles. So it was racking my brain. I couldn't find anything with this size axle on there. So I think that what happened here was at some point in this truck's life, it got a new axle replacement, and it was an aftermarket one, and they, for whatever reason, decided to be different. And yeah, so now we're stuck with that situation. One other thing to point out that I also noticed is our axle bearing retainers from left to right. This is the one that was on this right axle with a different style bearing. There was a sealed bearing, and then on the passenger side, we had this one that you can see has the larger retainer to it. And whenever I looked at the bearing, the right side, obviously I cut it up, but the right side had an outer seal as well as an inner, whereas the this left side just had the inner bearing seal. So I think that this is the older style with the bearing that has a seal like this. I found a new bearing for that, which is going to be this style here. It's got that for the outer. So we're going to go ahead and press this on for the right side. I couldn't find another bearing that fit this axle. So fortunately I had a spare 9-inch, and this one here is the same size axle bearing situation as the passenger side. It's the same length and everything that we need for our housing. So we're going to be using this axle here. So I still need to cut off the old bearing. I left it on to kind of show you the assembled version of what this looks like. If you see here, this has the larger retainer, just like what we had on the passenger side. And then you can see this is a 2-piece bearing where it's got this outer seal that moves, and then we have the inner one, and then our retainer. So these should be the same. One thing that is different that I'm not too sure what the deal is if you look at the actual flange or mating surface of the wheel, this one is a little bit smaller, but the bolt pattern is the same. So I do not think that it really matters, but I guess we'll find out. Hopefully not with any major part failure. So that's gonna be our plan. I'm gonna get this bearing cut off. This is gonna become our new left axle. This one's still gonna be the right. We'll get the new bearings pressed on, which is gonna be this style here, and get these thrown back here, back in the truck here. So. All right, so that's where we actually want this bearing pressed on the way it's supposed to. Hopefully you get a little bit closer look. That's fully seated, and that's what we're looking for. Important note, make sure that you're always wearing your safety glasses. It's no excuse. Whenever the bearing did explode in my face, I was wearing my safety glasses, pressing it on, but I ended up flipping them up to the top of my head to read the caliper, and of course, my luck, that's when it popped. Could have been worse. Fortunately, I didn't get hit with anything, still got my eyes, good shape. So wear your PPE. So whenever you're putting these back on, make sure that you have this little ridge in your retainer is facing the bottom. And then installation is simple. And a lot of times it will be stamped, which I think this one is somewhere. It says top with an arrow. And just be careful so you're not damaging your inner seal. Just lift it up. And then you'll find that the splines, a couple taps. And then it's just a matter of going ahead and putting on your retainer nuts, and the axle will be installed at that point. Sometimes with a posi track rear end, you run into a situation like we are here, where on the passenger side of the truck or vehicle axle, whatever, there's just one spline section that goes to the spider gears. and then on the driver's side, there's 2. And if you have those 2 gears that are offset just a little bit, your axle will only go in the first line and then it will hit the second one without lining up and not let it go in all the way. So there's a trick that I learned on how to address that. I'm gonna show you guys how you would do it. What you wanna do is hold your other side stationary. You can take something like a pry bar, which is what we're gonna be doing, and stick it here in the studs and just try to keep it still. While I am gonna do the same thing on my end and try to spin it, and hopefully I'll be able to get those 2 gears to spin and line up and just do a little bit at a time while tapping in the axle, and hopefully it will go the rest of the way home. So I'm gonna turn the camera around and get you guys a better look at that, and hopefully it will go in without too much of a hassle. So that worked, that's all we needed to do. You're gonna have a little bit of your outer seal showing whenever you get your retaining plate on all the way. It's gonna suck it in the rest of the way if it needs to go in any further at all. So, but yeah, all I had to do is just kind of give this a little bit of a bump, let that posi in there, the clutches slip a little bit, and then I kind of felt it move forward a little bit and just tapped it, so it went in. All right, so now we have our axles back in. The last thing we need to do is just go ahead and put some gear oil back in our differential. If you guys are running a posi, make sure you put a friction modifier in there. You want to make sure that those clutch packs have this, otherwise you could burn them up if you don't have it in there. So I'm using 85-140 for this. That's what it calls for a Ford 9-inch. So yeah, go ahead. I would recommend putting this in one of these bottles first. That way you can squeeze it in. These bottles are definitely a lot easier to use. Either these or the bag that you can squeeze in, as opposed to the typical oil quart size. I think could be a little bit of a pain in the ass as far as trying to fit them in this drain plug or fill plug. So that's about it, guys. Hopefully you guys got some good content and this video is helpful. If it was to you, if you just had a good time passing the time, go ahead, give the video a like, and if you're not subscribed to the channel, go ahead and do that. So thank you guys all for watching. You get outside, get wrenched on something, piss off your neighbor, disappoint your mom, and until next time, keep on keeping on.
You can see the riding on the pavement. Young kids, they're growing up in basements. Online, a whole new generation. I'ma make mine, so you better go take it. Always, they need a new replacement. Decentralized, can't contain it. We're changing lives, yeah, upgrading. Call it suicide of the older generation. What keeps you up at night, yeah.